Hey guys, Chris from CameoCreeps.com here. Today I'm going to talk to you about how I painted Mistress Noctavia VanEssence. First I start out with my drawing, working on cold press illustration board, using a mechanical pencil with HB lead. After my drawing's done, I'm pretty happy with it. I'll fix it with workable fixative. Started painting here. I'm working back to front. I'm working in opaque acrylic crafter's paints. Started out here working in burnt umber. I'm working right on the surface of the raw board. Using a 3-round paintbrush, acrylic synthetic brush. I'm going to start adding a little bit of cool elements here. Goal here is to get kind of a cool glow from the ghostly apparition of this creep here. The paint that I'm using dries pretty quickly, so it allows for me to work fast. Notice how I'm using the edge of my brush to carve out the shape of the character here in the foreground. Doing a little bit of blending while the paint still has some wetness to it. Carving in. So now that I've got my background moving the way that I like it, I'm going to go in and start working on the figure. Here I'm using the same mixture of paint that I used for the background, only with a lot more water added to it. Since I'm working in acrylic, I can kind of go from washes to opaques pretty seamlessly. I'm not too worried about painting over my drawing. Since I'm working in the transparent, I can still see my drawing and I can go in and add details later. But you'll notice, since it's a transparency, I'm using the white of the board as part of the value structure compared to the opaque paint that I put down for the background. Here I'm starting to soften those edges up, kind of starting to start thinking about how I want to create the transparent effect of her ghost head. Building up transparency. Add a little bit more umber to my brush. I'm going to start introducing that into the painting, kind of get a consistent look. Consistency of color. Putting it right behind that collar there, so you you can start to see a transition. As that dries, I'm going to go in and start working in the cloak. It's a very similar technique. I'm using a little more water to the brush, so I get a nice transparent, almost watercolor effect. In this stage, too, of blocking in transparency, it's really just a matter of making sure that you get paint on the board. I know that might sound kind of strange, but that's actually the biggest problem that I have, and this is the easiest way that I've been able to figure out how to solve that, is to use washes, cover up the whiteboard, and then build opaques later, and I'll show you a little bit of that as we move forward. Once again, carving with the brush tip as it's loaded. So now that I've got everything kind of blocked in, I started going in with opaques on the jewelry. I used yellow ochre for the gold jewelry. Now I'm using a mixture of white, yellow ochre, and burnt umber to kind of get a gray tone for the pearl teardrop jewelry. Here I'm using I've switched brushes, and I'm now using a zero liner watercolor brush. So I'm working opaque over top of a transparent wash. And the versatility of the kind of acrylic paints that I use, which I'll go into probably more detail in a later video, it's just a really versatile paint. It allows a lot of options as an artist and how you'll want to approach painting. Fun thing about painting the Cameo Creeps in miniature is that it's really I've broken it down into the simple. I've tried to break it down anyway in the simplest form of painting. Very simple strokes. Here you see I'm just doing little touches of the pearl inlay. I'm not over detailing it or overthinking the process. Very simple strokes. See, I add a little bit more white there. Going to pop that out. I believe it's like a titanium white. So here you can see I've started to go back into the jewelry and add some burgundy jewels. Starting to add hits of light on the jewelry. And now that that jewelry is kind of working the way I want it, I'm going to start working on her head and the most important parts here, like this collar. Once again, I'm using kind of like a warm white. I think I probably added a touch of yellow ochre to the titanium white. Warm it up a little bit. So here I'm painting right through my drawing in an opaque, and what the goal here is to kind of get this transparency from the head to the back of the collar. Starting to add in little frilly details, very simple hits right into the drawing there. So now that I got that working pretty well, pretty happy with it, I'm going to go in and start to build up opaques over the transparency using less water as I get more into it and into more detail work. This head is the heads in the Cameo Creeps are kind of the most important part. For some reason I have a tendency to leave them last, so I can make sure that everything's working. I can always go back and forth, if I need to. So here you can see I'm laying a nice juicy opaque raw highlight of her forehead. Still using my Zero liner watercolor brush. I like working with the watercolor brushes in acrylic because they have a tendency to hold the paint a little longer than, say, a bristle brush. These synthetic brushes are nice and they hold the paint really well. A lot of experimenting. And you have to find out what works for you too. I mean, if you're going to paint miniature, experimentation is key to find out what works best. How do you want to approach it? I'm just sharing here what I like to do and how I like to paint. But everybody's process is different. Excuse me, but the goals are the same. Try to make a good piece of art. So here I'm building up more opaque, starting to pay attention to the form. So here I'm finishing up, starting to add in more color. I'm going to use a phthalo blue with some white to start to really get that ghostly glow. Started to push and pull the shapes with a darker hue and adding whites and highlights into the hair. Finished up the jewelry in the hair similar to the same manner I did with her cloak. And then, just cleaning up those edge lines and sharpening focus. So here you have Mistress Noctavia VanEssence of the Cameo Creeps. Thanks for watching.